What if you could find a fossil that is basically a member of the group that led to humans, but with giant saber-like teeth and jaws so powerful they could crunch through bone? Welcome to my channel, and today we are talking about Anteosaurus, the proto-mammal version of Tyrannosaurus. So there have been some pretty wild finds in the famous fossil site of Ghost Ranch, New Mexico. There's been everything from petrified palm wood to ancient volcanic ash. But one of the most noteworthy fossils is that of a strange beast named Anteosaurus. This critter lived during the early part of the Permian period around 290 million years ago. And while it looks kind of reptile-like, it is actually a stem mammal. In other words, it was an early ancestor of all mammals, including us. Even though it belongs to a group called Synapsida, which means that it is related to all major groups of mammals, most scientists used to think that it was semi-aquatic like a crocodile. Some even thought that it couldn't move very well on land because its skull was just too big. Not only that, but it was also thought that it had a long neck like a plesiosaur or a giraffe, except that it didn't quite get that long, and these days it's estimated to have been about 6 meters long. So basically the old-school view of Anteosaurus was that it was a mix between a whale and a crocodile, with the size of a megalodon and the speed of a doson. Basically, it was kind of a problem for evolution. However, a recent analysis of Anteosaurs in 2023 turned all of that on its head and revealed that it was much more similar to T-Rex than researchers expected. And this is really cool because it turns out that this mammal ancestor was probably fast and ferocious, maybe something like a tyrannosaur, Rex analog. And what's super interesting is that these ancestors of ours were evolving alongside the ancestors of dinosaurs during a time when the two groups were still pretty similar. And yet, they evolved along completely different trajectories after that. Okay, let's break this down. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What did Anteosaurus eat? Well, its teeth sure looked like those of a carnivore, and according to the new study, it had at least 40 serrated teeth on each side of its upper jaw, which would have been perfect for shearing through flesh. And the study authors believe that it wasn't picky either. One of the reasons that the researchers knew that Ankylosaurus was a carnivore is that they found tooth marks on the bones of its potential prey. They discovered a collection of bones that had clear tooth marks left by Anteosaurus, including those of the Texas archerfish, Petrolaceratops, and the weird mammal-like capybara. Capybara, by the way, is the name of a genus that contains several species of chunky little mammal-like reptiles, and it looks like Anteosaurus was perfectly happy to munch on them. In fact, it was such a dedicated hunter that it likely had powerful jaws that could exert a bite force of over 5,000 pounds per square inch. That's roughly comparable to the bite force of animals like crocodiles and hellbenders, but stronger than that of any other known synapsid. And according to the study, it could easily crack through bone. And while the skulls of modern whales and dolphins are small compared to their body size, the skull of Anteosaurus was huge and robust, which may have helped to support its large and powerful jaws. However, the thing that makes this mammal ancestor even cooler is that it wasn't the monster that scientists once thought it was. They used to think that it was kind of like an amphibian, spending lots of time in the water, but now it turns out that it was much more like a theropod dinosaur. One piece of evidence for this comes from the structure of the shoulder blades of Anteosaurus. Scientists know that the shape of these bones can tell us how an animal moved. In modern animals, there's lots of variation in shoulder blade shape. If the scapula, or shoulder blade, is relatively flat, then that animal tends to move by sprawling. Sprawl, meaning that the legs are pulled out to the sides. Most reptiles move in this way. Meanwhile, if the shoulder blade has a pronounced spine, then the animal walks with its limbs underneath its body. Birds and mammals use this method of locomotion. And guess what? The shape of Anteosaur's shoulder blades suggests that it walked with its legs underneath its body, just like a mammal or bird. So it wasn't slithering around in the water like scientists used to think. Instead, it was walking on land with the intention of chasing down prey. And to move around on land, it would have needed to be fast, and a recent study suggests that it might have been able to run at speeds up to 75 kilometers per hour. Yeah, that's like running a marathon pace. And what's funny is that the group that Anteosaurus belongs to, Synapsida, split off from the lineage leading to dinosaurs about 318 million years ago. And for a long time, they were pretty similar. Both groups had mostly upright bodies with legs positioned underneath them. They both had efficient ways of ventilating their lungs. And they were both super diverse. So it was really anyone's evolutionary race. But while synapsids like Anteosaurus started out small, dinosaurs began to get bigger and bigger, and eventually they dominated. And the reason for this is still unknown, but scientists think that it may have something to do with reproduction. Dinosaurs laid eggs, and this may have given them an advantage over synapsids, which gave birth to live young. Giving birth to live babies could have been risky, since the mother would have had to expose her belly in order to get the little ones out, and egg-laying may have been safer. Now, not all synapsids gave birth to live young. Early in their evolutionary history, they did lay eggs too, but towards the end of the Permian, most had switched to giving birth to live young, just like most mammals do today. And this may have made them less adaptable to environmental changes. So basically, while the evolutionary split between dinosaurs and synapsids happened long before Anteosaurus existed, the two groups were still pretty similar when our favorite saber-tooth was scampering around New Mexico, and because Anteosaurus was a speedy hunter, it required lots of energy. According to the new study, it would have needed at least 23,000 calories per day. To put that number into context, an adult male grizzly bear needs about 3,000 calories per day. So yeah, Anteosaurus would have needed lots of food. And the study authors believe that this explains why it was so successful. It was better adapted for life on land than other synapsids. And it was huge, which meant that it could go longer without needing to find a new meal. And while it was alive, it had lots of competition from the ancestors of dinosaurs. And yet, somehow, it survived until the end of the Permian when a mass extinction event wiped out nearly all life on Earth. Now, despite all of this success, there aren't many fossil remains of anteaters, and the one that's been found in Ghost Ranch, New Mexico, isn't even complete. It consists of just a few pieces of its skull and some of its teeth, and that's partly because its skull was so big. When animals die, their skulls often get kicked around and broken into lots of pieces, and then those pieces get lost to time. So even if Anteosaurus was a super successful animal, it would have been hard for its skeleton to survive intact. And it seems like this was especially true for the back half of its skull, because the old-school reconstruction of Anteosaurus didn't just imagine it as having a long neck, it imagined that its jaws were at the back of its skull, just like a crocodile's. And that meant that the tip of its snout was missing. This made sense to scientists because, again, they thought that anteosaurs were semi-aquatic, and they figured that it would have needed a long, narrow snout to catch fish. But now that we know that Anteosaurus was a land-dwelling carnivore, the picture changes. It doesn't need a long, narrow snout to catch slippery prey. And its jaws are way further forward on its skull than scientists used to think. The team behind the new study realized that this would explain why the back half of its skull was never found. Basically, its skull was shaped more like a crocodile's skull than a whale's. And that means that when it got chomped on by scavengers, its back skull was more likely to break off and get lost. So, who was Anteosaurus? Well, it wasn't a goofy-looking amphibious monster. Instead, it was a vicious, speedy predator that stalked the Earth at the same time that the ancestors of dinosaurs were getting their start. And it's pretty neat to know that we share a common ancestor with a ferocious land predator. Maybe we got some of our killer instincts from them. So what should we talk about next? Please let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for new episodes every week. Thanks for coming along on this journey through time. I'll see you later.